best we can about what people's rights are. We want all of you in this room, we want the general public, we want law enforcement to know what the rules are. So I will be giving educational information, I won't be giving legal advice. If you come to me and you need legal help, I feel like I haven't done my job. I actually want to keep you all out of trouble and to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible, both at APEC and also in the years to come. So the title of tonight's activity is Know Your Rights, Documenting Law Enforcement Interactions in Hawaii. So I will give you the very, very short answer, and then I'm going to back up, give a little bit more background information, then we'll go back into some of the particulars for documenting interactions with law enforcement. So the short answer is you can photograph, video, or audio record law enforcement officers so long as three things happen. One is that you are legally allowed wherever it is that you happen to be recording. Two is that you're not interfering with law enforcement. And three is that you're not recording some sort of conversation that's intended to be private. So that's it. We're going to go through in much more detail what those three things mean. But that's sort of the long and short of what it means to be able to document law enforcement. And the law will be specific to Hawaii. Different states have different law regarding wiretap, but this is I'm going to just be focusing on Hawaii. So the bigger question for us is, why do we care? Why does the ACLU care about these issues? First, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides for freedom of the press. It also provides for freedom of speech. And both these issues are implicated by our desire and ability to record law enforcement doing their jobs in public. But the bigger picture for us and sort of the issues underlying why we want to document law enforcement is that the entire Constitution is about limited government powers and about the people's ability to hold government accountable for its actions. When we talk about videotaping police officers, the impetus behind that generally is the police officers work for us, right? They're part of our government is us. And so we want to make sure that the government is abiding by the wishes of the people, that the government is following the law, and that, again, the government is doing what it is that we want the government to do. Videotaping police, as I'm sure you can all imagine, is good for a number of reasons, and we fully support individuals' right to document law enforcement interactions with the public for a number of reasons. First, and since many of you are in media, you know, having something on film, having something on audio tape is often the difference between it happened or it didn't happen. People's memories are imperfect, but if you have a recording of something, that says what it is. And so if you have videotape of law enforcement doing something that they shouldn't, or members of the public doing something that they shouldn't, it takes a lot of the ambiguity out of the situation. So you have a much clearer picture of what happened to know whether anyone's rights were violated. Especially when you get into court, government agents often have a great deal of credibility. Government agents are often accustomed to testifying in courts. They will appear in court in uniform, and members of the public and judges will often give their testimony a great deal of weight whenever they are testifying as to their version of events. And so my point here is not to disparage police or to suggest that anyone is fabricating anything or the other. My point is only that when you do have the accurate record, when you have the video, when you have the audio, again, we take the ambiguity out of the situation, we're able to focus on what actually happened, and then we can sort of focus on, well, was the law violated in some way or another? The other main important issue for us is that, again, as you all know, by having film equipment on scene, by demonstrating to government officials that you are recording a conversation or an incident, you can often deter a lot of unlawful conduct by anybody who's being filmed. Obviously, we all know when we're on camera, we act differently than when we are not on camera. And by having film, audio present when law enforcement is interacting with the police, when law enforcement is interacting with the public, everybody's on better behavior. At least that's our hope. And so you can often deter unpleasant interactions between law enforcement and the public simply by virtue of having film equipment there. So the ACLU has been working for years on a number of different fronts to support freedom of the press and also to support the rights of free speech, and more specifically to support the right of individuals to document law enforcement. More generally, the ACLU has been very active in promoting and protecting Hawaii's Media Shield law. So as many of you may know, Hawaii passed a statute several years ago that gives reporters and journalists, and there's a very broad definition for those terms, gives reporters and journalists very strong protections against disclosing confidential sources and confidential material and unpublished material. And as far as we know, the case that we were involved with several years ago involving a documentary filmmaker who was subpoenaed for his unpublished raw footage, as far as we know, that's been the only case that's been litigated in the state so far, and we were successful in defending the filmmaker's right to keep his unpublished material private. And while we're speaking about Media Shield, the bill was set to expire this past year. The legislature extended it for 2 more years, so it will be coming up again. But again, we encourage everyone to contact your legislators and let others know that this issue is important, that it really does help to foster a vibrant media culture. Another thing that we've been working very hard on for the last couple of weeks is the publication of our ACLU Know Your Rights Toolkit, which we have many copies of in the back. And for anyone viewing at home, if you would like a copy, you can get all the text on our website. It's acluhawaii.org. You can also contact our office. We're happy to mail you copies free of charge. And APEC certainly was impetus for us to get all this information in one place. The document talks about a very wide range of topics relating to free speech and freedom of the press. It talks about when you might need a permit, if you want to have a parade, how do you go about doing that? What happens when you're approached by law enforcement? What are your rights when you're approached by law enforcement? And it has a very large section on your rights to document interactions with law enforcement in particular. So this toolkit actually has nothing specific about APEC in it. It is specific to Honolulu County. We are working on producing versions for the neighbor islands as well. But we wanted to focus here to make sure that both the public and the government, including Honolulu Police Department, have information at their fingertips and have the information sort of all in one place to know what your rights are for a variety of events that may or may not take place at APEC. For APEC in particular, I should mention that the ACLU has no position one way or the other on APEC. We want to make sure that we are a resource for anybody who wants to have any kind of demonstration of any kind, whether it be in favor of or against APEC, whether it be in favor of or against any particular world leader who happens to be here. But we do know that these kinds of large events tend to draw large numbers of protesters. And so, again, we want everybody to know what their rights are. If anything, I think the information we've contained in the toolkit and the information that I'll give you tonight is on the conservative side. I do not want anybody getting arrested, and I will say, sort of now, I will say throughout the course of this presentation, that if a police officer is demanding that you see something or that you're going to be arrested, our recommendation is that you follow the police officer's instructions. There may be many times where you're simply mistaken about some fact as to whether you are legally entitled to do something. And also, if law enforcement does overstep its bounds, as does happen from time to time, you can always come talk to us or talk to another private attorney, and there's always the opportunity to try to address that through litigation afterwards. But the last thing that I want to see happen is that any individual's safety is in danger. We do know that the police has large quantities of pepper spray, beanbags, and tasers and other weapons, which can cause serious harm or death. And I want to make sure that everyone's safety is paramount. You can always contact us afterwards. So let me get into sort of more of the specifics of what you can do when you're talking about documenting law enforcement. Again, I talked about 3 different things that you need to be aware of. Number 1, are you legally where you are standing or sitting when you're filming? If you are trespassing on private property, the First Amendment doesn't give you the right to continue trespassing in order to film. I had a question at another event a few weeks ago, well, why do I need a parade permit? Can't I just go march in the streets whenever I want to? Because the First Amendment gives me the right to speak. And our answer is always, the First Amendment says that Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech or freedom of the press, but it's not absolute. The government can enact time, place, and manner restrictions on your First Amendment activities. So you can't simply waltz into the Oval Office and start banging symbols because that's part of your message. The government can set reasonable boundaries on what it is, not what it is that you want to say, but when and how it is that you want to express your message. So, private trespass law will still apply. So number one, you're legally allowed to be where you are standing. For APEC in particular, the government has released maps and some detailed information regarding secure zones around different venues for APEC. So simply because you want to express your First Amendment rights does not give you the right to charge through the barricade and begin filming. You will be arrested. So again, you have to be legally where you are. It has to be legal for you to be wherever it is that you're standing, number one. Number two is that I'm actually going to talk for just another minute or two, and then we'll take a couple of questions. Number two is that you are not interfering with law enforcement in their duties. And this, sometimes there's a lot of gray area in terms of whether an officer thinks that you are interfering or not. There was a report from not very long ago of a woman who was standing in her front yard, this was in Rochester, New York, and filming the police, who ended up getting arrested because the officer said that she was interfering in his traffic stop that he had enacted, sort of engaged right in front of his house. So our recommendation is, again, if you're keeping your distance, generally you should be fine, but if a police officer tells you that you're interfering, our advice is to follow what the police officer is saying and back up. Again, if the police officer is saying you have no right to film, then that's something that you should contact us about. And you should feel free to inform the officer, no, I in fact do have a First Amendment right to film law enforcement in public. But again, I don't want anybody getting arrested. The third factor, which is probably the more confusing of the three, is that you're not recording a conversation that is intended to be private. So Hawaii is a one-party consent state for wiretapping purposes, and what that means is that only one party to the conversation needs to consent to have the conversation recorded. So if you are speaking with a police officer in Hawaii, you are not violating Hawaii wiretap law if you are recording that conversation. Where it gets a little bit trickier is if you are not a party to that conversation. Now, if you are witnessing law enforcement interaction with the public and it's in a public place, you can film that. You can record that. It's in a public place. There's no expectation of privacy on behalf of anybody who's involved in that conversation. If you happen to see that, 100 yards away, there is a police officer talking to someone in a private corner, and it looks like they're trying to have a private conversation, and you use a telescopic microphone to try to record it, you may be violating Hawaii wiretap law. If the officer or someone else is saying, look, we have a reasonable expectation that our conversation is going to be private and you recorded it, that could be a violation of Hawaii wiretap law depending on the circumstances. But again, what we're hearing most often is happening is that there's something happening 15 feet in front of you. There are other people around. There is no indication that the event is private in any way, and a person trying to film it is nevertheless being harassed by police. We've heard a number of stories like that, both here in Honolulu, involving both Honolulu police and also state sheriffs. We've also gotten a report from over on Maui, the Maui Police Department, because a lot of times police officers will say, you have no right to film me. If the blanket statement from the police officer or any other law enforcement officer is, you have no right to film me, as a general principle, that is incorrect. Again, you don't want anybody getting arrested, but you can inform the officer, or you can ask the officer, well, what law am I breaking that you're telling me that I'm not allowed to film you? Because pursuant to the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has been very clear that individuals have a right to record matters of public importance, and that includes law enforcement's interactions with the public in public places. So that's sort of the top three. I know we had one question, and so why don't we start with that, and we'll see where that takes us. And if you please use the mic.
The question I had, getting back to the first one, I know you don't give advice, so I won't take it as advice. But let's say if I was traveling on the highway with a group of people, determined to go to certain places, and we know that they are going to be functioning away from this particular place. For example, on Saturday, they're going to be in Waikiki. And I'm concerned whether or not they stop us on the freeway. Is that a violation of some sort? Can they do that? And even if they did that, I think you kind of answered the question that I had, that, I would ask them, what law am I breaking? Because I think that on the highway, it's not private property, so everybody has use for the freeway to get to a destination.
Now, are you talking about driving a car and being pulled over, or are you talking about being
organizing, like a convoy, just flying out flags, Hawaiian flag, and just coming up peacefully and notifying all the authorities, even the police? They know that this is what we want to do, and we want to end up in Violani Palace and do a protocol over there, and everyone can enjoy our freedom. Hawaiian pride, justice, and free Hawaii. That's it. We're not talking about APEC. However, they're here, and they're going to be down in Olelo. So our intention is never to go close to that area. But if you see a convoy coming from Macau, obviously, it's a national security kind of stuff. They might think, well, I want to stop them. And if they stop us in Nanakuli, what are we going to do,
Sure.
And you kind of answered it. The first question I would ask the officer, are we breaking any laws?
Sure. Now, your question raises a couple of different issues. One is, are you, when you're having this sort of convoy, are you going to be following sort of regular traffic laws?
Correct.
Because that's sort of the main thing. When we talk about different kinds of permitted events, so some people, want to have a demonstration in a park, some on a sidewalk, sometimes on a public street. Anytime that you're doing anything where you're going to block a public street, and whether that's to have a march or to have a parade or to have a convoy of cars, if it's going to be blocking the street, you're going to need a permit for that, because the city needs to arrange for police to mark off different streets and to make sure that traffic safety is going ahead. Now, if you're having cars that are simply driving all together, again, I don't know offhand whether that's going to be violating any particular law. But in general, if you are driving and you are not breaking any law, then there's no basis for the police to pull you over. When you're in a car, the police have to have some reasonable suspicion to believe that you have committed some crime or some violation of some kind. Now, that can be something as minor as having an expired safety check. Again, you talk about flying flags. I have no idea what the rules are in terms of displaying a flag on a car. There are all kinds of very detailed rules when you're talking about doing things in your car. You can always contact the City Department of Transportation if you have specific questions. Their phone number is actually in our toolkit, so you can look that up and contact them. And they have all the rules about parades and traffic issues that your question is raising.
But I think what we're doing is the right thing to do, to notify all the authorities, the state as well as the federal, if they wanted to, of what our intention is to go there peacefully. And if we get any kind of encounters, that's where you folks come in. We need help and advice and maybe later on, but as much as possible, I want the group to be peaceful. We need to control it. We cannot be swearing or sticking finger at them, even though we want to, but we can't. We just have to enjoy the day. But knowing the fact that they are here and they've been practicing live, I was telling Pono, my nephew just the other day, they were in Aclu, full gear and everything, practicing on live traffic. It's a national security thing, and everybody's wondering, what's going on.
And you raise a really good point, because in our toolkit we talk a lot about getting permits and sort of the circumstances under which you may or may not need a permit. There are lots of times when groups don't need a permit for their event, technically, either under city rules or under the Constitution. But there are some times, like you're suggesting, that it may be advantageous to notify law enforcement anyway, just to try to avoid any hassles ahead of time. So I wish you good luck with your events.
Sure.
If you do have problems, please again feel free to contact our office.
Appreciate the honor. Thank you.
All right, yeah, please just come on up to the mic if you have questions.
I just thought I'd ask for a clarification on one little point of tension, I guess, that came up here in the last couple of weeks during this march through Waikiki. And I suppose, well, the situation came about when everyone is legally doing what they're supposed to as far as not impeding flow of traffic on the sidewalk, everybody's sticking to one side of the sidewalk, things of that sort. They even have some of those tamed down kind of quasi plainclothes cops, escorting.
It's Civil Affairs
The
Division.
Civil Affairs Division, yes. So they were right in close proximity, but there were a couple of security guards on private property in front of one of the hotels. I'm probably going to carefully message that we happen to be delivering with our free speech rights, but they started telling us, even though we were moving along and not congesting things or not purposely doing so, to the point that the civil affairs officers had no problem with the flow and pace of the march that was taking place. But the security guards were kind of, I suppose, I take it as harassment and trying to tell us to keep moving on, and they were very rough with us and stuff. Of course, I think that we were very well tempered as a group and had no intention of buying into any, playing into any of the conflict they might be trying to generate. But when it comes to security guards on private property, and say where there's an interface between public space, private property, what sorts of rights, or do we need to listen to security guards if we're obeying the law and on public property?
It's a great question, and it raises a number of murky legal issues. Again, in the toolkit, we talk about how if you're on a public sidewalk, it may not always be perfectly clear when you've crossed from a public sidewalk to private space. And again, the rights that we're talking about under the First Amendment, they apply to public spaces like sidewalk, but they may also at times apply to private property that's a traditional public forum. So it may be that you're on a private sidewalk that's actually privately owned, but it's still subject to the same rules as a public sidewalk because it's sort of being used in a traditional public way. It's very, very fact-specific, varies or detail-oriented as to whether or not the private guards can tell you to move along or not. What I would encourage you to do is, again, to contact our office if you're having specific problems so that we can look into the specifics, and if necessary, we can contact the private property owner to say, look, you cannot tell individuals on public sidewalks, even if they're fronting your property, you can't force individuals to move along the sidewalk. I mean, if you're talking about a public sidewalk, you have the right to just stand still on the public sidewalk and hold a sign, again, provided that you're not blocking traffic.
Hi, hello. My name is Olelo. I really appreciate this valuable information. We definitely are going to need it. I just something just doesn't sit right in my okay, that's not good yet. It says American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii. What was this union of Hawaii, since we definitely received the lower end of this deal?
So
where are we occupied? I stand as a national. Where is my rights going to be protected by this so-called Liberties Union deal? And where do you stand? Because you're very compliant with the law, and you know exactly what the United States says, what they have.
Sure, well, thank you for that. What I can tell you is what Hawaii law and what United States law provides for regarding protection of civil rights and civil liberties. And I am very well aware that there are a host of other concerns regarding sovereignty and regarding many other issues that I don't have any knowledge of. And again, as a I've
But why are you here for, or you union for Hawaii if you don't have any knowledge of what transpired? That's my case in point right there.
Sure. No, and I appreciate the question. I think, for me, I'm a lawyer, right? So I'm thinking of, well, what happens if you are taken into court, either state court or federal court, on any of these issues regarding your right to free speech? And so the information that I'm providing now is, look, to the best of my knowledge, to the best of our organization's knowledge, these are your rights under state law and under federal law. And I completely understand and appreciate the position that these laws ought not apply and that, we ought to be doing something different with respect to our government. But my purpose in being here today, my purpose in working for this organization, again, is not to advance anyone or degrade anyone's substantive cause, but to just say, given the legal framework that we have right now, these are the rights, these are the responsibilities, these are the privileges that we enjoy, again, under state and federal law. Again, I can't really address your other concerns, which I hear and I understand, but all I have to offer today is information under Hawaii state law and federal law.
Okay, I really agree with that. But if you have no treaty of annexation, can you actually have a mutual bond between so-called a sovereign nation and another sovereign nation?
And again, I appreciate the question, and I'm not a scholar of those kinds of issues. The limited time that I've had to sort of... No, please go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. I'm sorry, I'm taking it probably out of your jurisdiction, so...
Yeah, and I certainly, I don't want to speak on matters that I don't have enough knowledge of. I wouldn't want to, say anything that, again, where I'm not speaking from my own knowledge.
Well, you see, because that's how I stand as a Hawaiian national, so I'm wondering if I get arrested, can I depend on you and come to you since I also am, so-called Catholic citizen?
Well, what I can tell you is that in state courts and federal courts, when people have tried to advance as a defense that the federal or state government does not have jurisdiction, those arguments have been uniformly rejected by the courts. Now, whether the argument should be accepted, again, I'm not here to give my opinion as to that. What I can say is that those arguments are not going to be accepted by the courts. What I can offer you is what the courts are going to do, with respect to state and federal law.
Okay, well, thank you. I just see this federal law and this state law bringing in a whole bunch of countries over here to slice and dice and privatize my sovereign nation. That makes me sick and pissed off.
Thank you for your comments.
I want to know, where do the people of Hawaii stand? Because I've heard that they're going to have motorcades, and if they have motorcades, that the ramps to the highways are going to be shut off to the public. So one can't shoot or whatever. But it's like, are they going to do it at the peak traffic time? Or are they going to plan ahead?
It's a great question. I think there are going to be a lot of traffic problems that weekend. But, obviously I'm not with the Secret Service, so I can't tell you, when they're going to have Obama coming through town or if he's going to shut Nagro. What I can tell you is that APEC itself, the leaders' meetings themselves, are going to be held over Veterans Day weekend. So it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where Friday itself is a federal holiday. So hopefully, again, this is just my own hope as a Honolulu resident and having to get from point A to point B. My hope is that there won't be the kind of normal rush hour traffic that we see on a typical weekday because, again, it's a federal holiday and then a weekend after that.
Thank you for coming to instruct us and give us some guidance. But I've heard that the Honolulu Police Department has stopped issuing permits What do you know about that process? Were permits ever available?
So if I'm understanding your question right, are you asking about permits for parks or permits for demonstrations or?
Near the convention center where the
Sure.
APEC.
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that. I think the short answer to your question is, well, there are several answers to your question. Number one is that there are different kinds of permits for different things depending on where it is that you want to have an event. Again, we go through a lot of this information in our toolkit, so I recommend you take a look through that. But the short answer is the City and County Department of Parks and Recreation controls city parks. Right, so Olelo, Kapiolani, Olelo, those are all city parks where the City Department of Parks and Recreation has jurisdiction. If you're talking about sidewalks or streets, that's the City Department of Transportation. If you're talking about the Hollow grounds, that's the federal government, and so the federal government has its own set of guidelines. And then there are other federal properties such as the federal building and military institutions that all have their own separate rules. So if you're looking at having events related to APEC near the convention center, it sort of depends on where it is that you want to have your event and what kind of events you want to have. If you're looking at having a demonstration,
Just to film it,
just a what?
just to record the event.
Okay, well again, it would depend on where it is that you are going to be. Now, you're sort of raising a separate issue of press credentials and whether press may be allowed inside the APEC events themselves. I don't know anything about the process for getting press credentials. I don't know anything about how you would end up being sort of a certified member of the press to go in and film those kinds of events.
It's not my question.
Okay, so if your question is, if I just want to go outside and film,
On the sidewalk.
yeah.
Whether it be on the sidewalk at the convention, where the public has access to that sidewalk,
Sure. So there's
or the street.
there are a number of different issues that you're raising. So again, first, as I was saying, where do you want to be? So if you're saying, okay, I want to be on the sidewalk at a convention center, it depends on where you want to be. And part of the issue right now is that as of today, we don't have all the information about what areas are going to be open or closed to the public surrounding the convention center. The State Department has released some pretty specific information on parking restrictions and traffic flow restrictions around the convention center itself. And so we do know that the street from sort of Atkinson and Kapiolani, sort of directly in front of the convention center, we know that that's going to be closed to vehicles for about the week prior to including APEC.
What about pedestrians?
Sure, yeah, I'm getting it. So for pedestrians, there's the Olelo promenade behind the convention center. So immediately behind is going to be mostly blocked off. And the sidewalk immediately in front of the convention center is also going to be blocked off. From what I can tell right now, it looks like the sidewalk across the street from the convention center is still going to be open to pedestrians. However, the only information they have right now is preliminary information from the State Department, and they do say that for the leaders' meetings themselves, they may put up more of a secure zone around the convention center itself. So what I would encourage you to do is to look online, because both the City and County of Honolulu, they have a website, and so the mayor's office has a website about APEC. There's a separate sort of APEC host committee website, and the various governmental entities have been working to put that information out to the public so that we can avoid traffic problems and people can know where they are and are not allowed to stand. And we're actually, comparing APEC with other events of this size that have occurred on the mainland. The government has actually released the information about secure zones substantially further in advance for APEC than they have for other events like the G20 on the mainland. So we're actually very pleased from that perspective that the city and county and the various other government agencies were able to work together to get information out to the public so that they have at least some idea of what roads are going to be closed and what parks are able to protest at.
How about an event scheduled for Iolani Palace?
So the state has, and actually when I went through the list of city and county and federal, I should have also added state to that list, because the state has its own set of rules for having an event on state property. And so Iolani Palace is part of Department of Land and Natural Resources, which is a state agency. There are state administrative rules that cover state property in general. There are also state-specific rules to Elon Palace in terms of getting a permit to do a demonstration there. As a general rule right now, to the best of my knowledge, the state is saying that you need a permit for any event that's larger than 25 people, and you need to submit your permit application at least 10 days in advance. I believe it's 10 business days. Now, if there are groups that want to have events at Elon Palace and are having trouble with any of those requirements, we do encourage you to contact our office because we've actually been working with the state for over a year now on amending some of its rules regarding permit applications because we have some concerns about some of the language that they have in permit applications. So we've been going through that process. And again, if Elon Palace is the site where you want to have an event and you're having any trouble, we do encourage you to contact us. What I do know also about Elon Palace is that as far as I can tell, it's not going to be the site of any APEC-specific events as of right now. So it's not inside the secure zone for the convention center or Halekoa or Coavina, obviously. These are very sort of far apart venues. So hopefully there shouldn't be any impact to any individual's ability to hold the event on Elon Palace grounds.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a question from an attendee. How should I respond when police ask to see photographs or delete them from my camera?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So let me go through some of the other sort of general principles when we talk about knowing your rights to photograph and video the police. As a general rule, police cannot confiscate your photographs or video, nor can they demand to view your photographs or video without a warrant. Now, sometimes if you are arrested, the police may go through your video or go through your audio. Their ability to do that without a warrant is unsettled. And so
a quick thing there too. Say my device is password protected, and they want to go through my photos and videos on site. Are they and they tell me I have to give the password? Is that required? That's
no.
the follow-up.
Yeah, the follow-up is no, that is not required. So let me sort of talk about the easy scenario and then the harder scenario. So the easy scenario is, you're filming, you're doing your thing, everything seems fine, and the police come and demand to take your equipment and view your footage. So first off, the general recommendation, so the general information we give to individuals whenever you're approached by law enforcement is, am I under arrest? And if the answer is yes, ask why. If the answer is no, then you're free to go. The police cannot detain you without any reasonable suspicion that you are involved in any criminal activity whatsoever. So again, they can't, and the Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable seizures by the government. So they are not allowed to come up and simply grab your camera and take it. They also are not, you're never, I shouldn't say never, as a general rule, you're not required to answer any questions. You can always say, I want my lawyer, I don't want to answer any questions. And while we're on that topic, I'll take a very brief detour. If you are ever arrested, you do have the right to remain silent. But a recent U.S. Supreme Court case said that in order to assert your right to remain silent, you need to say, I wish to remain silent. So it's sort of an interesting twist right now. But again, all this information is contained within our toolkit. And so if you are approached by police, you can say, am I under arrest? And if the answer is no, then you can say, am I free to go? And you should be allowed to go if you're not under arrest. Where it gets a little bit murkier is if you have filmed something and your film could be used as evidence of some crime. Now again, filming itself is not the crime, but they may say, oh, you filmed this thing happening and we want to take your video as evidence of that crime. Again, our position is that they, first off, they can never delete your video without your permission. And if that happens, please contact our office right away. But again, generally, they can't confiscate it or view it without a warrant. Now, if they demand it and they say you're going to be arrested as a result, again, our advice is, comply with these directives and contact our office immediately, and we can try and deal with the situation then. But it gets a little bit murkier when we're talking about, if you do have evidence of a crime that they may want to use later on.
Hi, my name is Brad. I'm really happy to have this time to talk with you, with your brain. I have two questions, but if I keep them short and succinct, do you mind?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, my first one is, if you were to completely disable the audio, like remove the microphone from your camera, and you made it clear to the police, you told them right out, I'm recording video, but there's no audio, would that give you any different leeway or ability or rights?
It's an interesting question. Normally, to my understanding, actually, let me shuffle papers a second, because I want to look at our state wiretap law. I actually, off the top of my head, I don't know that it would make any difference. Because the wiretap law, so this is required by statute 711-1111, and it talks about having any device for hearing, recording, amplifying, or broadcasting sounds. The only time that I think it would make a difference is when we talked earlier about using a telescopic microphone. So if you're using a video camera from, very far away, again, if they're in public sight, then it's public sight and you have the right to film it. But it's the audio that's really you have potential issues with if you're recording a private conversation. Now again, if you plant a private video camera, I don't know if that's ever been tested about just the video and not the audio. I don't know the answer. But what I suspect is, again, the general guidelines that we talked about earlier, where if you're a party to it, you can tape it. If you're not party to it, you can tape it so long as the police officer involved doesn't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That should apply regardless of whether it's audio or video or both. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it pretty much did, thank you. My next question, I run a few blogs that talk about this and similar topics. And I get a lot of people that ask me questions and a lot of people that argue with me about things. And I was wondering if you could clear this up. I was recently talking to a police officer, and he said that even though I might have the right to film, by disobeying a direct order to not film, then I could be arrested. And so in other words, I may have the right to have my hands out of my pockets or in my pockets, but if they tell me a direct order, keep your hands out of your pockets, and I put them in, and they would say, well, we have a right to arrest them for failure to obey a direct order. And we live in a society where people can be arrested strictly for resisting arrest with no other charge, which is actually, if you think about it, it's pretty ludicrous. So given that we have to obey a direct order, even though we have the right to film, we also have the right to wear a hat or to wear a jacket. But if they say, for my protection, here's when you take your jacket off, I have to do it. And if I say I'm not going to take it off, I'm not going to show you, my arms or my hands, I'm going to keep behind me, and they said I have to, obviously they could then arrest me. So couldn't they arrest me just for not reporting, but for refusing to obey an order?
Again, I don't want to ever be in a position where I'm saying, no, you should be ignoring police officers. I'm never going to say that because, again, your safety is paramount, and I don't want you getting arrested unnecessarily.
Well, let's not say me in particular, but...
Sure, it's a general view, right? So, the part of the reason I'm concerned is that even if the police sort of can't think of a reason on the spot to arrest you, if they think of something later that could apply, they can proceed with those charges, even if that wasn't the original reason for the arrest. And the Supreme Court has said, look, if there was some basis on which they could have been arrested, that the police are in the clear. So, yes, it's true that the police can't demand that you stop filming. If they do demand that you stop filming, again, please contact our office right away. You can also feel free to ask the police officer why it is that she or he is telling you that you don't have the right to film. I carry a toolkit around and say, look, it says right here that, under these statutes, I have every right to do it under the First Amendment, under state law, under state Supreme Court case law. You have the right to do it. But I do know that, there are times when police officers in the heat of the moment, exceed their authority. And so, again, the information that we're providing here to be general guidelines, but the most important thing is to use common sense when you're out on the street and to evaluate the situation accordingly. So we have, I think, time for...
Thank you, sir.
You're quite welcome. I think we have time for just one more question.
Hi, my name is Paul. Couple quick questions. One was, Can police officers request a social security number? Every time I've been stopped in White, they've asked me for my social security number, and I said, that has to do with my retirement. What does that have anything to do at all with the police department? And that's my private information. I prefer not to tell you. And then they get pretty aggressive about getting it out of me. The second question was, can we proactively call the ACLU to work with us before we get into one of these situations that we're going to plan an event, so that we can be proactive about what we do instead of waiting for trouble and calling you? And last, if I'm videotaping police and I'm being told by the officer that some of us are undercover cops, we don't want to be on video, you're endangering us, what should I do in that circumstance if I actually did record the video and so we're deciding to complain? Thank you.
Sure. So, all right, so 3 questions. Let me answer the second question first, which is, can I contact the ACLU and be proactive about it? Yes, absolutely. We can't give legal advice to individuals who are not our clients, but we're certainly happy to help to facilitate any questions that you might have. So, for example, the question was about, can we have a convoy? Again, I would respond to that by saying, I recommend that you call the city just to make sure that you can stay out of trouble. So yes, please contact our office ahead of time. We're happy to help however we can. Please do keep in mind we are a small office. We have a limited number of people. We can't always get to everything as quickly as people would like, but we do our best to try to answer all those kinds of questions. So the first question was then, and I'm sorry, the Social Security number. So it actually raises a couple issues. One is, can a law enforcement officer come up to you and demand identification? And the answer depends on whether it's a state law enforcement officer or a federal law enforcement officer. Federal officers can come up and ask you for ID. If you're not, you can say, am I free to go? And again, if they have some reason to believe that you're involved in some criminal activity, they may have a justification for demanding you show ID. But sometimes federal officials may just come and ask you for ID, and you can say, no, thank you, I'd rather not provide it. And if you're free to go, then you're free to go. State officials, there's actually state Supreme Court case law that says that state officials cannot simply come up and ask you for ID absent some reasonable suspicion that you are involved in criminal activity. So, first off, if you ever have an officer come up and just demand identification from you, please contact our office. It's something that we'd like to know about. If the officer thinks that you've been involved in something criminal, then you may need to show ID. Now, the rules are different when you're driving. Anytime you're pulled over, you do have to show a driver's license. But there's no other circumstance, as a general rule, if you're not doing anything illegal, state officials are not allowed to ask for your ID. And if someone does ask for ID, you can say simply, I'm sorry, I'd rather not provide that, thank you very much. And if they say it's required, you can again ask, am I under arrest, am I free to go? Your third question was about undercover police officers.
How can they ask for my social security number specifically?
I don't. It's a good question. I don't know why they're asking. And again, I would include social security number in general with identification. So just think of it generally as, am I required to answer this question? And that goes for I'm asking for ID, for social security number, for what are you doing, where are you going? Anything really about you. The response can be, am I under arrest? Am I free to go? And if they say, no, you're not free to go, then you're under arrest, then you can say, okay, I assert the right to remain silent. I'd like to speak with my lawyer. Thank you very much. There can be times if you're just getting a citation and you're not actually under arrest that you are required to show ID. I don't know whether that applies to social security numbers either, but that's sort of the general rule.
Last question was what undercover cops?
I see that we are out of time, so I can speak to you afterwards. All right, well, thank you all very, very much for coming again. Thank you, guys.
Born to a class of people who were born to lead, they were called Ali'i, and one of them was she, Kamakaeha. Kamakaeha. And then a name before that, Lydia, the daughter of Keahokalole, from Keaweaheulu's clan. Her father, Kapa'akea, was a Konohiki man. The girl took another name later in life that she really didn't like, Lili'uokalani, to rule someday like her noble predecessors, a destiny from the need, a mission to set her people free. And in our kingdom in 1891, the time to fulfill her destiny had come, and as history recorded for all posterity, she was duly crowned with the name she never liked, Lili'uokalani. With her name and her year and her life completed, a time to promulgate a new constitution, the annexation boys planned out their retribution, to make believe that American lives were threatened and their property too would be destroyed, something they needed U.S. military intervention to avoid. And maybe inside, when you hear the story true, you want to get violent, lash out, try to blast, pop a cap on the pilot from the U.S. of A. and to hell with living on for another day. Marshal Charles Wilson was the man who told James Blount, "I'd shoot 'em dead where they stand," but our beloved Queen was smarter than that. To surrender to superior forces was her plan. She could plainly see she would be directed to kill from Washington, D.C. if Hawaiians resisted, if they kept up the fight and had persisted. We got an occupation by them still going on, and Queen Liliuokalani is no more. But her charge goes on. At times it is slow, but a country was stolen, and a country must be restored to establish again in one accord the right to govern with no outsider interest or interference. And that's going to take Onipa'a strength and perseverance.